Hey everybody, welcome to another deep dive into the world of ideas and thinkers who shape our understanding of society. Tonight, we're diving into the mind of a guy who's been called the most important intellectual alive. Yes, you guessed it, we're talking about Noam Chomsky. Don't worry, it's not as boring as it sounds. Chomsky's work is not just for academics, it's for anyone who wants to understand the world better. We're talking about Noam Chomsky and his book, Who Rules the World? This book is a must-read for anyone curious about global power dynamics. Chomsky isn't afraid to ask the tough questions. He challenges the status quo and makes us think critically about the information we consume. He wants us to look beyond the headlines and understand how power really works in the world. It's about seeing the bigger picture and connecting the dots. His book is like a giant behind-the-scenes tour of global politics, and trust me, it's a real eye-opener. You'll never look at the news the same way again. Chomsky argues that the world is run by a small group of powerful elites. These are the people who pull the strings behind the scenes. These elites use their influence to shape the world in their own interests. They have the power to make decisions that affect millions of lives. They don't care about ordinary people like you and me. Their main concern is maintaining their power and control. They care about one thing, staying on top, and they'll do whatever it takes to keep their position. So, buckle up as we explore Chomsky's world and uncover some uncomfortable truths about the way things really are. Get ready to challenge your perspectives and see the world through a new lens. Let's be honest, America likes to think of itself as the good guy, the hero in the global narrative, the defender of freedom and democracy, the land where liberty and justice are paramount. But Chomsky wants us to look in the mirror and ask ourselves, is that really true? Are we living up to the ideals we so proudly proclaim? He argues that America's actions often don't match its words. The rhetoric of freedom and democracy sometimes masks a different reality. Chomsky points to America's massive military spending. It's not just large, it's astronomical. It dwarfs every other country on the planet. The US spends more on its military than the next several countries combined. Why does America need so much firepower? Is it truly for defense, or is there another motive? Is it really about defending freedom, or is it about maintaining its dominance on the global stage? The line between defense and dominance can be blurry. He also criticizes America's habit of interfering in other countries' affairs. This interference is often justified as promoting democracy. We've all seen the headlines: regime change, drone strikes, covert operations. These actions are not isolated incidents but part of a broader pattern. Chomsky argues that these actions often create more problems than they solve. They lead to destruction and chaos. They destabilize regions and breed resentment towards the US. This resentment can fuel anti-American sentiments and even terrorism. So, is America a benevolent superpower or a bully on the global stage? The answer isn't simple and requires deep reflection. Chomsky makes us question the narrative we've been fed and challenges us to think critically about America's role in the world. He urges us to scrutinize our actions and their consequences. We all know corporations are powerful, but Chomsky argues that their influence has reached a terrifying level. He believes they've become like puppet masters, pulling the strings of governments and shaping global policies to benefit their bottom line. Think about it. Corporations lobby politicians, donate to their campaigns, and even write legislation themselves. They use their vast wealth to influence everything from trade agreements to environmental regulations. Is it any wonder that the interests of the rich and powerful often come before the needs of ordinary people? Chomsky believes this corporate grip on power is a threat to democracy itself. When corporations have more say than citizens, it undermines the very foundations of a free and just society. We'll be right back after this message from our sponsors. Just kidding. Unless... Ever feel like you're being lied to by the media? Well, Chomsky might just agree with you. He argues that the media plays a crucial role in maintaining the status quo. They don't just report the news, they shape it. Chomsky believes that the media, often owned by massive corporations themselves, act as gatekeepers of information. They decide what stories get told, how they're framed, and what perspectives are excluded. This creates a narrow and often biased view of the world that serves the interests of the powerful. He calls this manufacturing consent. The media, through selective reporting and framing, manufactures our consent for the policies and actions of the ruling elite. It's a sobering thought, right? And it makes you wonder, what are we not being told? Section 5. A world divided. The consequences of inequality. We live in a world of staggering inequality. A tiny elite controls a disproportionate amount of wealth and resources, while billions struggle to survive. Chomsky argues that this inequality isn't an accident, it's a direct result of the systems of power we've been talking about. He explains how the policies of powerful countries, often influenced by corporate interests, have created a global economic system that benefits the few at the expense of the many. This system traps developing countries in cycles of poverty and debt, while enriching the already wealthy. Chomsky believes that this level of inequality is not only morally wrong, but also a recipe for instability and conflict. When so many are deprived of basic necessities while a select few live in obscene luxury, it creates resentment and breeds unrest. Section 6. Iraq, a case study in power and propaganda. Remember the Iraq War? Chomsky certainly does. He sees it as a prime example of how power operates in the 21st century. He argues that the war was not about spreading democracy or fighting terrorism, as we were told, but about securing American dominance in the Middle East and controlling vital resources like oil. Chomsky points to the Bush administration's use of propaganda and manipulation to sell the war to the American public. Remember those weapons of mass destruction that turned out to be non-existent? He argues that the media played a key role in promoting the administration's narrative and silencing dissenting voices. The Iraq War, for Chomsky, is a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked power, media complicity, and the human cost of imperial ambitions. Section 7. Climate change and corporate greed, a toxic cocktail. Now let's talk about climate change, the biggest threat facing humanity today. Chomsky sees a clear link between climate change and the unfettered greed of corporations, particularly those in the fossil fuel industry. He argues that these corporations have known about the dangers of climate change for decades, but have actively suppressed this information and lobbied against any meaningful action to address it. Why? Because it would hurt their profits, of course. Chomsky believes that the climate crisis is a symptom of a larger sickness. A system that prioritizes short-term profits over the long-term health of the planet and its people. He argues that unless we challenge the power of these corporations and fundamentally change our relationship with the environment, we're headed for disaster. Section 8. Chomsky's challenge. Can we reclaim our world? This is a question that has been on the minds of many, especially in these turbulent times. So, it all sounds pretty bleak, right? The world seems to be in a constant state of crisis, with social unrest, economic disparity, and environmental degradation becoming the norm. But don't despair just yet. There is still hope, and there are still ways to make a difference. Chomsky may be a critic of the way things are, but he's not without hope. In fact, he believes that the power to change the world lies within each of us. He believes that change is possible, but it won't come from the top down. It will come from grassroots movements, from ordinary people coming together to demand a better future. It has to come from us, the people. We need to be the ones to take action, to get involved in our communities, and to make our voices heard. Chomsky reminds us that throughout history, ordinary people have risen up to challenge injustice and create a better world. From the civil rights movement to the fight for women's suffrage, change has always come from the bottom up. He calls for a more engaged and informed citizenry, one that is willing to question authority, hold leaders accountable, and fight for a more just and equitable society. This means staying informed, getting involved, and never being afraid to speak out. He believes that we have the power to create a world where decisions are made democratically, where everyone's voice is heard, and where the needs of the many are prioritized over the interests of the few, where corporations are held accountable for their actions, and where they can no longer exploit people and the planet for profit, and where the needs of the many come before the greed of the few. It's a vision of a world where cooperation and compassion are valued over competition and greed, and where we all work together to build a better future for everyone. Section 9. Time to act. Your voice, your world. So what can we do? Chomsky's message is clear. Get informed, get organized, and get active. Educate yourself about the issues, join organizations fighting for change, and make your voice heard. Support independent media, hold your elected officials accountable, and challenge corporate power. Every action, no matter how small, can contribute to creating a more just and sustainable world. Remember, apathy is the enemy. Silence is consent. The future is not something that just happens to us, it's something we create. So let's get to work. That's our show for tonight. See you next week. And remember, don't just watch the news, question it.